The Clock Strikes 13 by Mildred A. WIRT-BENSON. Recording by Cheryl Adam. Chapter 1. Sandwiches for Two. Jauntily, Penny Parker walked through the dimly lighted newsroom of the Riverview Star, her rubber heels making no sound on the bare, freshly scrubbed floor. Desks were deserted, for the final night edition of the paper had gone to press half an hour earlier, and only the cleaning women were at work. One of the women arrested a long sweep of her mop, just in time to avoid splashing the girl with water. "I'm sorry," she apologized in her best broken English. "I don't look for someone to come so very late." "Oh, curfew never rings for me," Penny laughed, sidestepping a puddle of water. "I'm likely to be abroad at any hour." At the far end of the long room, a light glowed behind a frosted glass marked "Anthony Parker, Editor." There the girl paused, and seeing her father's grotesque shadow, opened the door a tiny crack to rumble in a deep voice: "Hands up! I have you covered!" Taken by surprise, Mr. Parker swung quickly around, his swivel chair squeaking a loud protest. "Penny, I wish you wouldn't do that!" he exclaimed. "You know it always makes me jump." "Sorry, Dad," Penny grinned, slumping into a leather chair beside her father's desk. "A girl has to have some amusement, you know." "Didn't 3 hours at the moving picture theater satisfy you?" "Oh, the show was worse than awful. By the way, here's something for you." Removing a sealed yellow envelope from her purse, Penny flipped it carelessly across the desk. "I met a Western Union boy downstairs," she explained. "He was looking for you. I paid for the message and saved him a trip upstairs. $2.10, if you don't mind." Absently, Mr. Parker took 2 crisp dollar bills from his pocket and reached for the telegram. "Don't forget the dime," Penny reminded him. "It may seem a trifle to you, but not to a girl who has to live on a weekly allowance." For lack of change, the editor tossed over a quarter, which his daughter pocketed with deep satisfaction. Ripping open the envelope, he scanned the telegram, but as he read, his face darkened. "Why, Dad, what's wrong?" Penny asked in surprise. Mr. Parker crumpled the sheet into a round ball and hurled it toward the waste paper basket. "Your aim gets worse every day," Penny chuckled, stooping to retrieve the paper. Smoothing the corrugations, she read aloud: "Your editorial freedom of the press in Thursday's Star thoroughly disgusted this reader. What your cheap paper needs is a little less freedom and more decency. If our forefathers could have foreseen the yellow press of today, they would have regulated it, not made it free. Why don't you take that American flag off your masthead and substitute a cash register? Fly your true colors and soft pedal the Parker brand of hypocrisy." "Stop it! Don't read another line," the editor commanded before Penny had half finished. "Why, Dad, you poor old wounded lion," she chided, blue eyes dancing with mischief. "I thought you prided yourself that uncomplimentary opinions never disturbed you. Can't you take it anymore?" "I don't mind a few insults," Mr. Parker snapped, "but paying for them is another matter." "That's so. This little gem of literature did set you back $2.10. Lucky I collected before you opened the telegram." Mr. Parker slammed his desk shut with a force which rattled the office windows. "This same crackpot who signs himself Disgusted Reader or Ben Bowman or whatever name suits his fancy has sent me 6 telegrams in the past month. I'm getting fed up." "All of the messages collect?" "Every one. The nitwit has criticized everything from the Star's comic strips to the advertising columns. I've had enough of it." "Then why not do something about it?" Penny asked soothingly. "Refuse the telegrams." "It's not that easy," the editor growled. "Each day the Star receives a large number of collect messages. Hot news tips from out-of-town correspondents and from reporters who try to sell freelance stories. We're glad to pay for those telegrams. This fellow who keeps bombarding us is just smart enough to use different names and send his wires from various places. Sometimes he addresses the telegrams to me, and then perhaps to City Editor DeWitt or one of the other staff members." "In that case, I'm afraid you're out of luck," Penny said teasingly. "How about drowning your sorrows in a little sleep?" "It is late," Mr. Parker admitted, glancing at his watch. "Almost midnight. Time we're starting home." Reaching for his hat, Mr. Parker switched off the light, locked the door, and followed Penny down the stairway to the street. At the parking lot opposite the Star building, he tramped about restlessly while waiting for an attendant to bring the car. "I'll drive," Penny said, sliding behind the steering wheel. "In your present mood, you might inadvertently pick off a few pedestrians." "It makes my blood boil," Mr. Parker muttered, his thoughts reverting to the telegram. "Call my paper yellow, eh? And that crack about the cash register." "Oh, everyone knows the Star is the best paper in the state," Penny said, trying to coax him into a better mood. "You're a good editor, too. And a pretty fair father." "Thanks," Mr. Parker responded with a mock bow. "Since we're passing out compliments, you're not so bad yourself." Suddenly relaxing, he reached out to touch Penny's hand in a rare expression of affection. Tall and lean, a newspaperman with a reputation for courage and fight, he had only two interests in life: his paper and his daughter. Penny's mother had been dead many years, but at times he saw his wife again in the girl's sparkling blue eyes, golden hair, and especially in the way she smiled. "Hungry, Dad?" Penny asked unexpectedly, intruding upon his thoughts. "I know a dandy new hamburger place not far from here. Wonderful coffee, too." "Well, all right," Mr. Parker consented. "It's pretty late though. The big clock's striking midnight." As the car halted for a traffic light, they both listened to the musical chimes which preceded the regularly spaced strokes of the giant clock. Penny turned her head to gaze at the Hubble Memorial Tower, a grim stone building which rose to the height of 75 feet. Erected 10 years before as a monument to one of Riverview's wealthy citizens, its chimes could be heard for nearly a mile on a still night. On one side, its high narrow windows overlooked the city, while on the other, the cultivated land of truck farmers. "How strange!" Penny murmured as the last stroke of the clock died away. "What's strange?" Mr. Parker asked gruffly. "Why, that clock struck 13 times instead of 12. "Bunk and bosh!" "Oh, but it did!" Penny earnestly insisted. "I counted each stroke distinctly." "And one of them twice," scoffed her father. "Or are you spoofing your old dad?" "Oh, I'm not," Penny maintained. As the car moved ahead, she craned her neck to stare up at the stone tower. "I know I counted 13. Why, Dad, there's a green light burning in one of the windows. I never saw that before. What can it mean?" "It means we'll have a wreck unless you watch the road," Mr. Parker cried, giving the steering wheel a quick turn. "Where are you taking me anyhow?" "Out to Tony's." Reluctantly, Penny centered her full attention upon the highway. "It's only a mile into the country." "We won't be home before 1 o'clock," Mr. Parker complained. "But since we're this far, I suppose we may as well keep on." "Dad, about that light," Penny said thoughtfully. "Did you ever notice it before?" Mr. Parker turned to gaze back toward the stone tower. "There's no green light," he answered grimly. "Every window is dark." "But I saw it only an instant ago, and I did hear the clock strike 13. Cross my heart and hope to die—" "Never mind the dramatics," Mr. Parker cut in. "If the clock struck an extra time, which it didn't, something could have gone wrong with the mechanism. Don't try to build up a mystery out of your imagination." The car rattled over a bridge and past a deserted farmhouse that formerly had belonged to a queer old man named Peter Fenestra. Penny's gaze fastened momentarily upon an old-fashioned storm cellar which marred the appearance of the front yard. "I suppose I imagined all that too," she said, waving her hand toward the disfiguring cement hump. "Old Peter never had any hidden gold, he never had a secret pact with tattooed sailors, and he never tried to burn your newspaper plant." "I'll admit you did a nice piece of detective work when you uncovered that story," her father acknowledged. "Likewise, you brought the Star one of its best scoops by outwitting slippery Al Gepper and entangling him in his own silken ladder." "Don't forget the tale of the witch doll either," Penny reminded him. "You laughed at me then, just as you're doing now." "I'm not laughing," denied the editor. I merely say that no light was burning in the tower window, and I very much doubt that the clock struck more than 12 times. Tomorrow I shall go to the tower and talk with the caretaker, Seth McGuire. I'll prove to you that I was right." "If you do, I'll treat you to a dish of ice cream decorated with nuts." "Make it 5 gallons of gasoline and I'll be really interested," she countered. Due to an unusual set of circumstances, Penny had fallen heir to 2 automobiles. One, a second-hand contraption whose battered sides bore the signature of nearly every young person in Riverview. The other, a handsome maroon sedan, had been the gift of her father, presented in gratitude because of her excellent reporting of a case known to many as Behind the Green Door. Always hard pressed for funds, she found it all but impossible to keep 2 automobiles in operation, and her financial difficulties were a constant source of amusement to everyone but herself. Soon an electric sign proclaiming Tony's in huge block letters loomed up. Penny swung into the parking area, tooting the horn for service. Immediately, a white-coated waiter brought out a menu. "Coffee and 2 hamburgers," Penny ordered with a flourish. "Everything on one and everything but on the other." "No onions for the little lady?" The waiter grinned. "Okay, I'll have 'em right out." While waiting, Penny noticed that another car, a gray sedan, had drawn up close to the building. Although the 2 men who occupied the front seat had ordered food, they were not eating it. Instead, they conversed in low tones as they appeared to watch someone inside the cafe. "Dad, notice those 2 men," she whispered, touching his arm. "What about them?" he asked. But before she could reply, the waiter came with a tray of sandwiches which he hooked over the car door. "Not bad," Mr. Parker praised as he bit into a giant-sized hamburger. "First decent cup of coffee I've had in a week, too." "Dad, watch!" Penny reminded him. The restaurant door had opened and a man of early middle age came outside. Immediately, the couple in the gray sedan stiffened to alert attention. As the man passed their car, they lowered their heads, but the instant he had gone, they turned to peer after him. The man, who was being observed so closely, seemed unaware of the scrutiny. Crossing the parking lot, he chose a trail which led into a dense grove of trees. "Now's our chance!" cried one of the men in the gray sedan. "Come on, we'll get him!" Both alighted and likewise disappeared into the woods. "Dad, did you hear what they said?" asked Penny. "I did," he answered grimly. "Tough-looking customers, too." "I'm afraid they mean to rob that first man. Isn't there anything we can do?" Mr. Parker barely hesitated. "I may make a chump of myself," he said. "But here goes. I'll tag along and try to be on hand if anything happens." "Dad, don't do it," Penny pleaded, suddenly frightened lest her father face danger. "You might get hurt." Mr. Parker paid no heed. Swinging open the car door, he strode across the parking lot and entered the dark woods. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Night Riders. Not to be left behind, Penny quickly followed her father, overtaking him before he'd gone very far into the forest. "Penny, you shouldn't have come," he said sternly. "There may be trouble, and I'll not have you taking unnecessary risks." "I don't want you to do it either," she insisted. "Which way did the men go?" "That's what I wonder," Mr. Parker responded, listening intently. "Hear anything?" "Not a sound." "Queer that all 3 of them could disappear so quickly," the editor muttered. "I'm sure there's been no attack. Listen, what was that?" "It sounded like a car being started," Penny exclaimed. Hastening to the edge of the wood, she gazed toward the parking lot. The Parker car stood where it had been abandoned, but the gray sedan was missing. A moving taillight could be seen far down the road. "There go our friends," Mr. Parker commented rather irritably. "Their sudden departure probably saved me from making a chump of myself." "How could we tell they didn't mean to rob that other man?" Penny asked in an injured tone. "You thought yourself they intended to harm him." "Oh, I'm not blaming you," the editor answered, starting toward the parking lot. "I'm annoyed at myself. This is a graphic example of what we were talking about a while ago. Imagination." Decidedly crestfallen, Penny followed her father to the car. They finished their hamburgers, which had grown cold, and after the tray was removed, started home. "I could do with a little sleep," Mr. Parker yawned. "After a hard day at the office, your brand of nightlife's a bit too strenuous for me." Selecting a shortcut to Riverview, Penny paid strict attention to the road, for the narrow pavement had been patched in many places. On either side of the highway stretched truck farms with row upon row of neatly staked tomatoes and other crops. Rounding a bend, Penny was startled to see tongues of flame brightening the horizon. A large wooden barn, situated in plain view on a slight knoll, had caught fire and was burning rapidly. As she slammed on the brake, Mr. Parker roused himself from light slumber. "Now what?" he mumbled drowsily. "Dad, unless I'm imagining things again, that barn's on fire." "Let her burn," he mumbled, and then, fully aroused, swung open the car door. There were no firefighters on the scene. In fact, the only person visible was a woman in a dark flannel nightrobe who stood silhouetted in the red glare. As Penny and Mr. Parker reached her side, she stared at them, almost stupidly. "We'll lose everything," she said tonelessly. "Our entire crop of melons is inside the barn, packed for shipment, and my husband's new truck." "Have you called a fire company?" the editor asked. "I've called, but it won't do any good," she answered. "The barn will be gone before they can get here." With a high wind whipping the flames, Penny and her father knew that the woman spoke the truth. Already the fire had such a start that even had water been available, the barn could not have been saved. "Maybe I can get the truck out for you," Mr. Parker offered. As he swung open the barn doors, a wave of heat rushed into his face. Coughing and choking, he forced his way into the smoke-filled interior, unaware that Penny was at his side. Seeing her a moment later, he tried to send her back. "You can't get the truck out without me to help push," she replied, refusing to retreat. "Come on, we can do it." The shiny red truck was a fairly light one and stood on an inclined cement floor which sloped toward the exit. Nevertheless, although Penny and her father exerted every iota of their combined strength, they could not start it moving. "Maybe the brake is on," Mr. Parker gasped, running around to the cab. "Yes, it is." Pushing once more, they were able to start the truck rolling. Once in motion, its own momentum carried it down the runway into the open, a safe distance from the flames. "How about the crated melons?" Penny asked, breathing hard from the strenuous exertion. "Not a chance to save them," Mr. Parker answered. "We were lucky to get out the truck." Driven back by the heat, Penny and her father went to stand beside the woman in dark flannel. Thanking them for their efforts in her behalf, she added that her name was Mrs. Preston and that her husband was absent. "John went to Riverview and hasn't come back yet," she said brokenly. "This is going to be a great shock to him. All our work gone up in smoke." "Did you have the barn insured?" the editor questioned her. "Oh, John has a small policy," Mrs. Preston replied. "It covers the barn, but not the melons stored inside. Those men did it on purpose too. I saw one of them riding away." "What's that?" Mr. Parker demanded, wondering if he had understood the woman correctly. "You don't mean the fire was deliberately set?" "Yes, it was," the woman affirmed angrily. "I was sound asleep and then I heard a horse galloping into the yard. I ran to the window and saw the rider throw a lighted torch into the old hayloft. Soon as he saw it blaze up, he rode off." "Was the man anyone you knew?" Mr. Parker asked, amazed by the disclosure. "Were you able to see his face?" "Hardly," Mrs. Preston returned with a short laugh. "He wore a black hood. It covered his head and shoulders." "A black hood!" Penny exclaimed. "Why, Dad, that sounds like night riders." "Mrs. Preston, do you know of any reason why you or your husband might be the target of such cowardly action?" the newspaper man inquired. "It must have been done because John wouldn't join up with them." "Join some organization, you mean?" "Yes, they kept warning him something like this would happen, but John wouldn't have anything to do with them." "I don't blame your husband," said the editor, seeking to gather more information. Tell me, what is the name of this disreputable organization? What is its purpose and the names of the men who run it?" "I don't know any more about it than I've told you," Mrs. Preston replied, suddenly becoming close-lipped. "John never said much about it to me." "Are you afraid to tell me what you know?" Mr. Parker asked abruptly. "It doesn't pay to do too much talking. You act real friendly and you did me a good turn by saving my truck, but I don't even know your name." "Anthony Parker, owner of the Riverview Star." The information was anything but reassuring to the woman. "You're not aiming to write up anything I've told you for the paper?" she asked anxiously. "Not unless I believe that by doing so I can expose those night riders who have destroyed your barn." "Please don't print anything in the paper," Mrs. Preston pleaded. "It will only do harm. Those men will turn on John harder than ever." Before Mr. Parker could reply, the roof of the storage barn collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks and burning brands. By this time, the red glare in the sky had attracted the attention of neighbors, and several men came running into the yard. Realizing that he could not hope to gain additional information from the woman, Mr. Parker began to examine the ground in the vicinity of the barn. "Looking for hoof tracks?" Penny asked, falling into step beside him. "I thought we might find some, providing the woman told a straight story." "Dad, did you ever hear of an organization such as Mrs. Preston mentioned?" Penny inquired, her gaze on the ground. "I mean around Riverview, of course." Mr. Parker shook his head. "I never did, Penny. But if what she says is true, the Star will launch an investigation. We'll have no night riders in this community, not if it's in my power to blast them out." "Here's your first clue, Dad." Excitedly, Penny pointed to a series of hoof marks plainly visible in the soft earth. The tracks led toward the main road. "These prints haven't been made very long." "Dad, you look like Sherlock Holmes scooting along with his nose to the ground," Penny giggled. "You should have a magnifying glass to make the picture perfect." "Never mind the comedy," her father retorted gruffly. "This may mean a big story for the Star, not to mention a worthwhile service to the community." "Oh, I'm heartily in favor of your welfare work," Penny chuckled. "In fact, I think it would be wonderfully exciting to capture a night rider. Is that what you have in mind?" "We may as well follow this trail as far as we can. Apparently the fellow rode his horse just off the main highway, heading toward Riverview." "Be sure you don't follow the trail backwards," Penny teased. "That would absolutely ruin your reputation as a detective." "Jump in the car and drive while I stand on the running board," Mr. Parker ordered, ignoring his daughter's attempt at wit. "Keep close to the edge of the pavement and go slowly." Obeying instructions, Penny drove the car at an even speed. Due to a recent rain which had made the ground very soft, it was possible to follow the trail of hoof prints without difficulty. "We turn left here," Mr. Parker called as they came to a dirt road. "Speed up a bit or the tires may stick. And watch sharp for soft places." "Aye, aye, Captain," Penny laughed, thoroughly enjoying the adventure. Soon the car came to the entrance of a narrow, muddy lane, and there Mr. Parker called a halt. "We've come to the end of the trail," he announced. "Have the tracks ended?" Penny asked in disappointment as she applied the brakes. "Quite the contrary. They turn into this lane." Both Mr. Parker and his daughter gazed thoughtfully toward a small cabin which could be seen far back among the trees. Despite the late hour, a light still glowed in one of the windows. "The man who set the fire must live here!" Penny exclaimed. "What's our next move, Dad?" As she spoke, the roar of a fast-moving automobile was heard far up the road, approaching from the direction whence they had just come. "Pull over," Mr. Parker instructed, "and flash the tail light. We don't want to risk being struck." Barely did Penny have time to obey before the headbeams of the oncoming car illuminated the roadway. But as it approached, the automobile suddenly slackened speed, finally skidding to a standstill behind the Parker sedan. "That you, Clem Davis?" boomed a loud voice. "Stand where you are and don't make any false moves." End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. A Black Hood. "Good evening, Sheriff," Mr. Parker said evenly as he recognized the heavy-set man who stepped from a county automobile. "I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else this time." Sheriff Daniels put away his revolver and moved into the beam of light. "Sorry," he apologized. "Thought you might be Clem Davis, and I wasn't taking any chances. You're Parker of the Riverview Star?" "That's right," agreed the editor. "Looking for Clem Davis?" "I'm here to question him. I'm investigating a fire which was set at the Preston place." "You're a fast worker, Sheriff," Mr. Parker remarked. "My daughter and I just left the Preston farm and we didn't see you there. What put you on Davis' trail?" "Our officer received an anonymous phone call from a woman. She reported the fire and said I'd find my man here." "Could it have been Mrs. Preston who notified you?" Mr. Parker inquired thoughtfully. "It wasn't Mrs. Preston," answered the sheriff. "I traced the call to the Riverview exchange. Thought it might be the trick of a crank until our office got a report that a fire actually had been set at the Preston farm. By the way, what are you doing around here, Parker?" "Oh, just prowling," the editor replied, and explained briefly how he and Penny had chanced to be at the scene of the fire. "If you followed a horseman to this lane, there may be something to that anonymous phone call," the sheriff declared. "I'll look around and then maybe have a talk with Davis." "Mind if we accompany you?" inquired Mr. Parker. "Come along," the sheriff invited. Penny was hard pressed to keep step with the two men as they strode down the muddy lane. A light glowed in the window of the cabin and a woman could be seen sitting at a table. The sheriff, however, circled the house. Following the trail of hoof marks, he went directly to the stable, quietly opening the double doors. Once inside, Sheriff Daniels switched on a flashlight. The bright beam revealed 6 stalls, all empty save one, in which stood a handsome black mare who tugged restlessly at her tether. Her body was covered with sweat and she shivered. "This horse has been ridden hard," the sheriff observed, reaching to throw a blanket over her. "Here's something interesting," commented Mr. Parker. Stooping, he picked up a dark piece of cloth lying in plain view on the cement floor. It had been sewed in the shape of a headgear, with eye holes cut in the front side. "A black hood!" Penny shouted in awe. Sheriff Daniels took the cloth from the editor, examining it closely but saying very little. "Ever hear of any night riders in this community?" Mr. Parker asked after a moment, his tone casual. "Never did," the sheriff replied emphatically. "And I sure hope such a story doesn't get started." Mr. Parker fingered the black mask. "All the same, Sheriff, you can't just laugh off a thing like this. Even if the November elections aren't far away." "I'm not worried about losing my job," the other broke in. "So far as I know, there's no underground organization in this county. And all this mask proves is that Clem Davis may be the man who set the Preston fire." The officer turned to leave the stable. Before he could reach the exit, the double doors opened slowly. A woman who carried a lighted lantern peered inside. "Who's there?" she called in a loud voice. "Sheriff Daniels, ma'am," the officer answered. "You needn't be afraid." "Who said anything about being afraid?" the woman belligerently retorted. Coming into the stable, she gazed with undisguised suspicion from one person to another. She was noticeably thin, slightly stooped, and there was a hard set to her jaw. "You're Mrs. Davis?" the sheriff inquired, and as she nodded, he asked, "Clem around here?" "No, he ain't," she answered defiantly. "What you wanting him for anyway?" "Oh, just to ask a few questions. Where is your husband, Mrs. Davis?" "He went to town early and ain't been back. What you aiming to lay on to him, Sheriff?" "If your husband hasn't been here since early evening, who has ridden this horse?" the sheriff demanded, ignoring the question. Mrs. Davis' gaze roved to the stall where the black mare noisily crunched an ear of corn. "Why, Sal has been rid!" she exclaimed as if genuinely surprised. "But not by Clem. He went to town in the flivver and he ain't been back." "Sorry, but I have to take a look in the house." "Oh, search it from cellar to attic," the woman said angrily. "You won't find Clem. What's he wanted for anyway?" "The Preston barn was set afire tonight and your husband is a suspect." "Clem never did it. Why, the Prestons are good friends of ours. Somebody's just trying to make a peck of trouble for us." "That may be," the sheriff admitted. You say Clem hasn't been here tonight. In that case, who rode the mare?" "I don't know anything about it," the woman maintained sullenly. "Didn't you hear a horse come into the yard?" "I never heard a sound until your car stopped at the entrance to the lane." "I suppose you never saw this before either." The sheriff held up the black hood which had been found in the barn. Mrs. Davis stared blankly at the cloth. "I tell you, I don't know nothing about it, Sheriff. You ain't being fair if you try to hang that fire onto Clem, and you won't find him hiding in the house." "If your husband isn't here, I'll wait till he comes." "You may have a long wait, Sheriff," the woman retorted, her lips parting into a twisted smile. "You can come in though and look around." Not caring to follow the sheriff into the house, Penny and her father bade him goodbye a moment later. Tramping down the lane to their parked car, they both expressed the belief that Clem Davis would not be arrested during the night. "Obviously, the woman knows a lot more than she's willing to tell," Mr. Parker remarked, sliding into the seat beside Penny. "Dad, do you think it was Clem who set fire to the Preston barn?" "We have no reason to suspect anyone else," returned the editor. "All the evidence points to his guilt." Penny backed the car in the narrow lane heading toward Riverview. "That was the point I wanted to make," she said thoughtfully. "Doesn't it seem to you that the evidence was almost too plain?" "What do you mean, Penny?" "Well, I was just thinking, if I had been in Clem Davis' place, I never would have left a black hood lying where the first person to enter the barn would be sure to see it." "That's so. It was a bit obvious," Mr. Parker admitted. "The horse was left in the stable and the hoof tracks leading to the Davis place were easy to follow." "All true," Mr. Parker nodded. "Isn't it possible that someone could have tried to throw the blame on Clem?" suggested Penny, anxiously awaiting her father's reply. "There may be something to the theory," Mr. Parker responded. "Still, Mrs. Davis didn't deny that the mare belonged to her husband. She claimed that she hadn't heard the horse come into the stable, which obviously was a lie. Furthermore, I gathered the impression that Clem knew the sheriff was after him and intends to hide out." "It will be interesting to learn if Mr. Daniels makes an arrest. Do you expect to print anything about it in the paper?" "Only routine news of the fire," Mr. Parker replied. "There may be much more to this little incident than appears on the surface, but until something develops, we must wait." "If you could gain proof that night riders are operating in this community, what then?" Penny suggested eagerly. "In that case, I would certainly launch a vigorous campaign. But why go into all the details now? I'm sure I'll not assign you to the story." "Why not?" Penny asked in an injured tone. "I think night riders would be especially suited to my journalistic talents. I could gather information about Clem Davis and the Prestons and—" "This is Sheriff Daniels' baby and we'll let him take care of it for the time being," Mr. Parker interrupted. "Why not devote yourself to the great mystery of the Hubell clock? That should provide a safe outlet for your energies." The car was drawing close to Riverview. As it approached the tall stone tower, Penny raised her eyes to the dark windows. Just then the big clock struck twice. "2 o'clock," Mr. Parker observed, taking a quick glance at his watch. "Or would you say 3? "There's no argument about it this time, Dad. All the same, I intend to prove to you that I was right." "How?" her father asked, covering a wide yawn. "I don't know," Penny admitted, favoring the grim tower with a dark scowl. "But just you wait. I'll find a way." End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. A New Caretaker. "I declare, getting folks up becomes a harder task each morning," declared Mrs. Maud Weems, who had served as the Parker housekeeper for 11 years, as she brought a platter of bacon and eggs to the breakfast table. "I call and call until I'm fairly hoarse, and all I get in response is a few sleepy mutters and mumbles. The food is stone cold." "It's good all the same," praised Penny, pouring herself a large sized glass of orange juice. "There's not a woman in Riverview who can equal your cooking." "I'm in no mood for blarney this morning," the housekeeper warned. I must say quite frankly that I don't approve of the irregular hours in this house." "Penny and I did get in a little late last night," Mr. Parker admitted, winking at his daughter. "A little late! It must have been at least 4 o'clock when you came in. Oh, I heard you tiptoe up the stairs even if you did take off your shoes." "It was only a few minutes after 2, Penny corrected. "I'm sorry though that we awakened you." "I hadn't been asleep," Mrs. Weems replied, somewhat mollified by the apology. "I'm sure I heard every stroke of the clock last night." "You did?" Penny exclaimed with sudden interest. "How many times would you say it struck at midnight? I mean the Hubell Tower clock." "Such a question!" Mrs. Weems protested, thoroughly exasperated. "It's a very important one," Penny insisted. "My reputation and 5 gallons of gas are at stake. So weigh well your words before you speak." "The clock struck 12, of course." "There, you see, Penny?" Mr. Parker grinned triumphantly. "Does that satisfy you?" "Mrs. Weems," Penny persisted, "did you actually count the strokes?" "Certainly not. Why should I? The clock always strikes 12, therefore it must have struck that number last night." "I regret to say you've just disqualified yourself as a witness in this case," Penny said, helping herself to the last strip of bacon on the platter. "I must search farther afield for proof." "What are you talking about anyhow?" the housekeeper protested. "It doesn't make sense to me." As she finished breakfast, Penny explained to Mrs. Weems how the disagreement with her father had arisen. The housekeeper displayed slight interest in the tale of the clock, but asked many questions about the fire at the Preston farm. "That reminds me," Mr. Parker suddenly exclaimed before Penny had finished the story. "I want to phone Sheriff Daniels before I start for the office. Excuse me, please." Pushing aside his chair, he went hurriedly to the living room. Not wishing to miss any news which might have a bearing on the affair of the previous night, Penny trailed him, hovering close to the telephone. However, her father's brief comments told her almost nothing. "What did you learn?" she inquired eagerly as he hung up the receiver. "Was Clem Davis arrested last night?" "No, it turns out as we expected. Apparently Davis knew the sheriff was looking for him. Anyway, he never returned home." Jamming on his hat, Mr. Parker started for the front door. Penny pursued him to the garage, carrying on a running conversation. "This rather explodes my theory about Clem not being guilty," she remarked ruefully. "If he were innocent, one would expect him to face the sheriff and prove an alibi." "Davis can't be far away," Mr. Parker responded, getting into the maroon sedan. "The sheriff will nab him soon." Penny held open the garage doors, watching as her father backed down the driveway, scraping the bark of a tree whose gnarled trunk already bore many scars. Before she could re-enter the house, Louise Sidell, a dark-haired, slightly plump girl who was Penny's most loyal friend, sauntered into the yard. "Hi," she greeted cheerily. "About ready?" "Ready for what?" Penny asked, her face blank. Louise regarded her indignantly. "If that isn't just like you, Penny Parker. You make promises and then forget them. Don't you remember telling Mrs. Van Cleve of the Women's Club that we would help sell tags today for the Orphans' Home summer camp?" "Now that you remind me, I have a vague recollection. How many are we to sell?" 25 at not less than a quarter each. I have the tags, but we'll have to work fast or the other girls will sell all the easy customers." "I'll be with you in 2 shakes," Penny promised, heading for the house. "Wait until I tell Mrs. Weems where I'm going." Returning a moment later with the car ignition keys, she found Louise staring disconsolately at the empty space in the garage. "What became of your new car?" asked her chum. "Dad's auto is in the garage for repairs," Penny explained briefly. "I didn't have the heart to make him walk." "I should think not," laughed Louise. "Imagine having 3 cars in one family, if you can call this mess of junk by such a flattering name." Depreciatingly, she kicked the patched tire of a battered but brightly painted flivver which had seen its heyday in the early '30s. "Don't speak so disrespectfully of my property," Penny chided, sliding into the high, uncomfortable seat. Leaping Lena is a good car, even if she is a bit creaky in the joints. She still takes us places." "And leaves us stranded," Louise added with a sniff. "Oh, well, let's go. If we can." Penny stepped on the starter and waited expectantly. The motor sputtered and coughed, but true to form, it would not start. Just as the girls were convinced that they must walk, there was an explosive backfire, and then the car began to quiver with its familiar motion. "You should sell Lena to the government for a cannon," Louise teased as they rattled down the street. "What do you burn in this smoke machine? Kerosene?" "Never mind the slurs. When do we start our business operations?" "We've been assigned to the corner of Madison and Clark Streets," Louise answered as she separated the yellow benefit tags into two evenly divided piles. "It shouldn't take us long to get rid of these." Neither of the girls regretted their promise to help with the Tag Day sale, for the cause was a worthy one. The campaign to raise sufficient funds with which to purchase and equip an orphan summer camp had been underway for many weeks and was headed by Mrs. Van Cleve, a prominent clubwoman. Parking Leaping Lena at the designated street corner, the girls went to work with a will. All their lives they had lived in Riverview, and Penny in particular had a wide acquaintance. Accosting nearly everyone who passed, she soon disposed of all of her tags and then sold many for her chum. "They've gone fast," Louise declared as the morning wore on. "We have only one left." "Don't sell that tag," Penny said impulsively. "I have it earmarked for a certain person. Old Seth McGuire." "The caretaker at the Hubell Clock Tower?" Louise asked in astonishment. "Yes, he always likes children and I think he would be glad to help." "But why drive so far?" protested Louise. "I'm sure we could dispose of it right here and much quicker." "Oh, I have a special reason for going to see Seth," Penny answered carelessly. "I'll tell you about it on the way there." From her chum's manner, Louise deducted that something interesting lay ahead. She had learned, frequently to her sorrow, that Penny enjoyed interviewing unusual characters and engaging in amazing activities. Only a few months earlier, the girls had operated their own newspaper in an abandoned downtown building with results which were still the talk of Riverview. Another time, they had attended a society wedding on an island guarded by a drawbridge, and had ended by using the drawbridge as a means of capturing a boatload of crooks. In fact, Louise took delight in remarking that if ever her chum chose to write an autobiography, a suitable title would be "Life with Penelope Parker, Never a Dull Moment." "What's up now, Penny?" she inquired as they rattled toward the Hubell Tower in Leaping Lena. "Just a little argument I had with Dad last night. I maintain that the big clock struck 13 last night at midnight. He thinks I'm a wee bit touched in the head." "Which you must be," retorted Louise. "Who ever heard of such a thing?" "What's so crazy about it?" Penny asked with a grimace. "Didn't you ever hear a clock strike the wrong number?" "Of course, but not the Hubell clock. Why, the works were purchased in Europe, and it's supposed to be one of the best in the country." "Even a good clock can make a mistake, I guess. Anyway, we'll see what Seth McGuire has to say about it." Penny brought Leaping Lena to a quivering halt opposite the tall Hubell Tower. Glancing upward at the octagonal shaped clock face, she saw that the hands indicated 20 minutes to 12. "Rather an awkward time to call," she remarked, swinging open the car door. "But Seth probably won't mind." As the girls walked toward the tower entrance, they noticed that the grounds surrounding the building were not as neat as when they had last viewed them. The shrubs were untrimmed, the lawn choked with weeds, and old newspapers had matted against the hedge. "I wonder if Mr. McGuire has been well," Penny commented, knocking on the tower door. "He always took such pride in looking after the yard." "Well, at least he seems to be up and around," Louise returned in a low tone. "I can hear someone moving around inside." The girls waited expectantly for the door to open. When there was no response to their knock, Penny tried again. "Who's there?" called a loud and not very friendly voice. Penny knew that it was not old Seth who spoke, for the caretaker's high-pitched tones were unmistakable. "We came to see Mr. McGuire," she called through the panel. The door swung back and the girls found themselves facing a stout, red-faced man of perhaps 40 who wore a soiled suede jacket and unpressed corduroy trousers. "McGuire's not here anymore," he informed curtly. "You'll probably find him at his farm." Before the man could close the door, Penny quickly asked if Mr. McGuire had given up his position as caretaker because of sickness. "Oh, he was getting too old to do his work," the man answered with a shrug. "I'm Charlie Phelps, the new attendant. Visiting hours are from 2 to 4 each afternoon." "We didn't come to see the clock," persisted Penny. "What did bring you here then?" the man demanded gruffly. "You a personal friend of Seth's?" "Not exactly." Penny peered beyond the caretaker into an untidy living room clouded with tobacco smoke. "We thought we might sell him one of these tags. Perhaps you'd like to contribute to the Orphans' Camp Fund." She extended the bit of yellow cardboard, bestowing upon the attendant one of her most dazzling smiles. "No, thanks, sister," he declined, refusing to take the tag. "You'll have to peddle your wares somewhere else." "Only 25 cents." "I'm not interested. Now run along and give me a chance to eat my lunch in peace." "Sorry to have bothered you," Penny apologized woodenly. Without moving from the door, she inquired, "Oh, by the way, what happened to the clock last night?" "Nothing happened to it," the caretaker retorted. "What do you mean?" "At midnight it struck 13 times instead of 12." "You must have dreamed it," the man declared. "Say, what are you trying to do anyhow? Start stories so I'll lose my job?" "Why, I never thought of such a thing," Penny gasped. "I truly believe that the clock did strike 13. "Well, you were wrong, and I'll thank you not to go around telling folks such bunk," the man said angrily. "The clock hasn't struck a wrong hour since the day it was installed. I take better care of the mechanism than Seth McGuire ever did." "I didn't mean to intimate that you were careless," Penny began. She did not complete the sentence, for Charlie Phelps slammed the door in her face. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Old Seth. "Well, Penny, you certainly drew lightning that time," Louise remarked dryly as the girls retreated to Leaping Lena. "I thought Mr. Phelps was going to throw the tower at you." "How could I know he was so touchy?" Penny asked in a grieved tone. "You did talk as if you thought he'd been careless in taking care of the big clock." "I never meant it that way, Lou. Anyway, he could have been more polite." Jerking open the car door, Penny slid behind the steering wheel and jammed her foot on the starter. Leaping Lena, apparently realizing that her young mistress was in no mood for trifling, responded with instantaneous action. "I guess you're satisfied now that the clock never struck 13, Louise teased as the car fairly leaped forward. "I should say not," Penny retorted. "Why, I'm more convinced than ever that something went wrong with the mechanism last night. Phelps knew it too, and for that reason didn't want us asking questions." "You die hard, Penny," chuckled Louise. "From now on, I suppose you'll go around asking everyone you meet, 'Where were you at midnight of the 13th?'" "It wouldn't do any good. Most folks just take things for granted in this world. But there's one person who would pay attention to that clock." "Who?" "Why, old Seth McGuire. We'll drive out to his farm and ask him about it." "It's lunchtime and I'm hungry," Louise protested. "Oh, you can spend the rest of your life eating," Penny overruled her. "Business before pleasure, you know." Seth McGuire, one of Riverview's best known and well-loved characters, had been caretaker at the Hubell Clock Tower from the day of its erection, and the girls could not but wonder why he had been relieved of his post. The old man had personally installed the complicated machinery, caring for it faithfully over the years. In fact, his only other interest in life was his farm, located a mile from the city limits, and it was there that Penny hoped to find him. "Watch for a sign, Sleepy Hollow," she instructed. "Mr. McGuire has given his place a fancy name." A moment later, Louise, seeing the marker, cried, "There it is! Slow down!" Penny slammed on the brakes and Leaping Lena responded by shivering in every one of her ancient joints. Louise was thrown forward, barely catching herself in time to prevent a collision with the windshield. "Why don't you just join a stunt circus?" she said irritably. "You drive like Demon Dan." "We're here," Penny replied cheerfully. "Nice looking place, isn't it?" The car had pulled up near a small, neatly kept cottage framed in well-trimmed greenery. An even, rich green lawn was highlighted here and there by beds of bright red and blue flowers. After admiring the grounds, the girls rang the front bell. Receiving no response, they went around to the rear, pounding on the kitchen screen door. "Mr. McGuire's not here," said Louise. "Just another wild goose chase." "Let's try this outbuilding," Penny suggested, indicating a long, low structure made of cement building blocks which was roofed with tin. A sign dangling above the door proclaimed that it was the foundry and machine shop of one Seth McGuire, maker of bells and clocks. As the girls peered through the open door, an arresting sight met their gaze. Through clouds of smoke they saw a spry old man directing the movements of a muscular youth who pulled a large pot-shaped crucible of molten metal on an overhead pulley track. "Are you Seth McGuire?" Penny shouted to make herself heard above the noise of running machinery. The old man, turning his head, waved them back. "Don't come in here now," he warned. "It's dangerous. Wait until we pour the bell." With deft, sure hands, the old fellow pulled control chains attached to the crucible. The container twisted and finally overturned, allowing the molten metal to pour into a bell-shaped mold. As the last drops ran out of it, a great cloud of steam arose, enveloping both the old man and his helper. "Won't they be burned?" Louise murmured in alarm, moving hastily backward. "Mr. McGuire seems to know what he's doing," Penny answered, watching with interest. In a moment the steam cleared away and the old man motioned that the girls might come inside. "You'll have to excuse my manners," he apologized, his mild blue eyes regarding them with a twinkle. "Pouring a bell is exacting work, and you can't stop until it's done." "Is that what you were doing?" Penny inquired, staring at the steaming mass which had been poured into the mold. "It's sort of like making a gelatin pudding, isn't it?" "Jake and me never thought of it that way," the old man replied. "I learned from an old Swiss bell maker when I was a lad, and I apprenticed under a master, you may be sure of that." "How do you make a bell anyway?" Louise inquired curiously. "You can't tell in 5 minutes what it takes a lifetime to learn," the old man answered. "Now, a bell like this one I'm making for the Methodist Church at Blairstown takes a heap of work. Jake and me have worked a solid week getting the pattern and the mold ready for that pouring job you just saw." "Do you ever have any failures?" Penny asked, seeking to draw him out. "Not many, but once in a while a bell cracks," the old fellow said modestly. "That happens when the mold is damp or not of proper temperature. If gases collect, you may get a nice healthy explosion too." "Does it take a long while to finish a bell after it's been poured?" Penny pursued the subject. "A large one might require a week to cool, but I'll have this fellow out of the mold by tomorrow night," Mr. McGuire returned. "Then we'll polish her off, put in the clapper, and attach the bell to a sturdy mounting. If the tone is right, she'll be ready to install." "How do you tell about the tone?" Louise questioned in perplexity. "This one should have a deep, low tone," the old man replied. "Other things being equal, a large bell gives a deeper tone than a small one. Pitch depends upon diameter, and timbre upon the shape and the alloy used." "I never realized there was much to a bell besides its ding dong," commented Penny. "But tell me, Mr. McGuire, do you find this work more interesting than taking care of the clock tower?" "Oh, looking after that place wasn't work. It was more like a rest cure. I took the job because 12 years ago when the tower went up, they couldn't find a competent man to look after the clock." "And now you've gone back to your old trade?" "Oh, I liked it at the tower," old Seth admitted truthfully. "I'm a bit too old to do heavy work such as this. More than likely I'd have gone on putting in my time if Mr. Blake hadn't wanted the job for a friend of his." "Mr. Blake?" Penny inquired thoughtfully. "Do you mean Clyde Blake, the real estate man?" The old bell maker nodded as he gazed moodily out the window toward the distant tower, which could be seen outlined against the blue sky. "Yes, it was Blake that eased me out of that job." He has a lot of influence, and he uses it in ways some might say isn't always proper. I can make a fair living as long as I have my health, so I'm not complaining." "We met the new caretaker this morning," Penny said after a moment. "He wasn't very polite to us, and the grounds have gone to rack and ruin." "Did you notice the flower beds?" old Seth asked, feeling creeping into his voice. "Half choked with weeds. Charlie Phelps hasn't turned a hand since he took over there 6 weeks ago." "Oh, I suppose he spends most of his time looking after the big clock," Penny remarked, deliberately leading the old man deeper. "Charlie Phelps spends most of his hours smoking that vile pipe of his and entertaining his roustabout friends," old Seth snapped. "He doesn't know as much as a child about complicated clock machinery. What he can't take care of with an oil can goes unrepaired." The conversation had moved in exactly the channel which Penny desired. "No doubt that explains why the clock hasn't always been striking right of late," she said in an offhand way. "Last night I was almost sure I heard it strike 13 instead of 12 times. In fact, I had a little argument with my father about it." "You were correct," the old man assured her. "I was working late here in the shop and heard it myself." "There, you see, Louise!" Penny cried triumphantly, turning to her chum. "Mr. McGuire, what would cause the clock to strike wrong?" the other asked. "I was wondering myself," he admitted. "In all the 10 years I was at the tower, it never once struck an incorrect hour. I think there must have been something wrong with the striking train." "Pardon my ignorance," laughed Penny, "but what in the world is a striking train?" "Oh, we apply that name to the center section of the mechanism which operates the clock. The going train drives the hands, while the quarter train chimes the quarter hours, sounding 4 tuned bells." "Just as clear as mud," sighed Louise, who disliked all mechanical things. "Does the clock strike wrong every night?" "Last night was the first time I ever heard it add a stroke," Mr. McGuire answered. "I'll be listening though, to see if Phelps gets it fixed." Penny and Louise had accomplished the purpose of their trip, and so, after looking about the shop for a few minutes, left without trying to sell the old man a camp benefit tag. "Why didn't you ask him to take one?" Louise asked as she and her chum climbed into the parked car. "Oh, I don't know," Penny answered uncomfortably. "It just came over me that old Seth probably doesn't have much money now that he's out of steady work." "He must make quite a lot from his bells." "But how often does he get an order?" Penny speculated. "I'd guess not once in 3 months, if that often. It's a pity Mr. Blake had to push old Mr. McGuire out of the tower job." Louise nodded agreement, and then, with a quick change of subject, reminded her chum that they had had no lunch. "It's too late to go home," said Penny, who had other plans. "I'll treat you to one of the biggest hamburger sandwiches you ever wrapped your teeth around. How's that?" "I'll take anything so long as you pay for it," Louise agreed with a laugh. Driving on to Tony's, the girls lunched there without incident, and then started for Riverview by a different route. "Say, where are you taking me anyway?" Louise demanded suspiciously. "I've never been on this road before." "Only out to the Davis farm," Penny responded with a grin. "We have a little detective work to do." During the bumpy ride, she gave her chum a vivid account of the adventure she had shared with her father the previous night. "And just what do you expect to learn?" Louise inquired at the conclusion of the tale. "Are we expected to capture Clem Davis with our bare hands and turn him over to the authorities?" "Nothing quite so startling. I thought possibly Mrs. Davis might talk with us. She seems to know a lot more about the fire than she would tell." "I don't mind tagging along," Louise consented reluctantly. "It doesn't seem likely, though, that the woman will break down and implicate her husband just because you won a story for the Riverview Star." Undisturbed by her chum's teasing, Penny parked Leaping Lena at the entrance to the lane, and the girls walked to the cabin. "It doesn't look as if anyone's here," Louise remarked, rapping for the second time on the oaken door. "I'm sure there is," Penny replied in a whisper. "As we came up the lane, I saw the curtains move." Louise knocked a third time, so hard that the door rattled. "At any rate, no one's going to answer," she said. "We may as well go." "All right," Penny agreed, although it was not in her nature to give up so easily. The girls walked down the lane until a clump of bushes screened them from the cabin. "Let's wait here," Penny proposed, halting. "I have a hunch Mrs. Davis is hiding from us." "What's to be gained by waiting?" grumbled Louise. Nevertheless, she crouched beside her chum, watching the house. 10 minutes elapsed. Both Louise and Penny grew very weary. Then, unexpectedly, the cabin door opened and Mrs. Davis peered into the yard. Seeing no one, she took a wooden water bucket and started with it to the pump, which was situated midway between cabin and stable. "Now's our chance," Penny whispered eagerly. "Come on, Louise. We'll cut off her retreat and she can't avoid meeting us." End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Tall Corn. Hastening up the lane, Penny and Louise approached the pump in such a way that Mrs. Davis could not return to the house without meeting them. Not until the woman had filled the water bucket and was starting back did she see the two girls. "Well?" she demanded defiantly. By daylight, the woman appeared much younger than Penny had taken her to be the previous night. Not more than 32, she wore a shapeless, faded blue dress which had seen many washings. Rather attractive brown hair had been drawn back into a tight, unbecoming knot that made her face seem grotesquely long. "I don't suppose you recognize me," Penny began diffidently. "My father and I were here last night with Sheriff Daniels." "I remember you very well," the woman retorted. "What do you want?" "Why, I would like to buy some melons," Penny replied, the idea only that instant occurring to her. "Have you any for sale?" "I thought you'd come to pester me with questions. Sure, we've got some good heart of gold out in the patch. How many do you want?" "About 3, I guess." "You can pick 'em out yourself if you want to," Mrs. Davis offered. Setting down the water bucket, she led the way through a gate to a melon patch behind the cabin. Her suspicions not entirely allayed, she demanded, "Sheriff Daniels didn't send you out here?" "Indeed not," Penny assured her. "I haven't seen him since last night." "It's all right then," Mrs. Davis said in a more friendly tone. She stooped to examine a ripe melon. "I figured maybe he sent you to find out what became of my husband." "Oh, no. Didn't Mr. Davis return home last night?" "Not on your life," the woman answered grimly. "And he won't be back either. Not while Sheriff Daniels is looking for him." From Mrs. Davis' manner of speaking, Penny was convinced that she had been in communication with her husband since the sheriff's visit. Trying to keep her voice casual, she observed, "Don't you think it would be wise for your husband to give himself up? By hiding, he makes it appear as though he actually did set fire to the Preston barn." "Clem would be fool to give himself up now. Why, they'd be sure to hang the fire onto him even though he wasn't within a mile of the Preston place." "Then he couldn't prove it?" "Not a chance," the woman said with a short, hard laugh. "Clem was framed. He never rode the horse last night, and that black hood was planted in the stable." "Does your husband have any enemies?" "Sure, he's got plenty of them." "Then perhaps you could name a person who might have tried to throw blame on your husband." "I could tell plenty if I was a mind to," the woman said significantly. "I'd do it in a minute, only it would make things worse for Clem." Penny started to reply, then remained silent as she saw that Mrs. Davis' gaze had focused upon a section of cornfield which fringed the melon patch. The tall stalks were waving in an agitated manner, suggesting that someone might be moving among them. "Here are your melons," Mrs. Davis said nervously, thrusting 3 large ones into Penny's hands. "That will be a quarter." As the girl paid her, she abruptly turned and hurried toward the house. "Just a minute, Mrs. Davis," Penny called. "If you'll only talk to me, I may be able to help your husband." The woman heard but paid no heed. Picking up the water bucket, she entered the cabin, closing the door behind her. Well, we gained 3 melons and that's all, Louise shrugged. What's our next move? I think Mrs. Davis was on the verge of telling us something important, Penny declared, her voice low. Then she saw someone out there in the cornfield and changed her mind. I don't see anyone now, Louise said, staring in the direction her chum had indicated. The stalks aren't even moving. They were a minute ago. Clem Davis may be hiding out there, Lou. Or it could be some of Sheriff Davis's men watching the cabin. Or an Indian waiting to scalp us, teased Louise. Let's go back to the car. Penny shook her head and started toward the corn patch. Reluctantly, Louise followed, overtaking her at the edge of the field. Sheriff Daniels! Penny called through cupped hands. There was no answer, only a gentle rippling of the corn stalks some distance from them. Whoever the person is, he's sneaking away, Penny whispered. Come on, let's stop him. Don't be foolish, Louise protested, but her chum had vanished into the forest of tall corn. After a moment of indecision, she too entered the field. By that time there was no sign of Penny, no sound to guide her. Wandering aimlessly, first in one direction, then another, she soon became hopelessly lost. Penny! She shouted frantically. Here! Called a voice not far away. Tracing the sound and making repeated calls, Louise finally came face to face with her chum. Such a commotion as you've been making, chided Penny. Not a chance to catch that fellow now. I don't care, Louise retorted crossly. Her hair was disarranged, stockings matted with burrs. If we can get out of this dreadful maze, I want to go to the car. We're at the edge of the field. Follow me and I'll pilot you to safety. Emerging a minute later at the end of the corn row, Penny saw the stable only a few yards away. Impulsively, she proposed to Louise that they investigate it for possible clues. I've had enough detective work for one day, her chum complained. Anyway, what do you hope to discover in an old barn? Maybe I can induce the horse to talk, Penny chuckled. Sal must know all the answers, if only she could speak. You'll have to give her the 3rd degree by yourself, Louise decided with finality. I shall go to the car. Taking the melons with her, she marched stiffly down the lane and climbed into Leaping Lena. Carefully, she rearranged her hair, plucked burrs, and then grew impatient because her chum did not come. Fully 20 minutes elapsed before Penny emerged from the stable. Sorry to keep you waiting so long, Lou, she apologized as she reached the car. See what I found. Penny held up a bright silver object which resembled a locket, save that it was smaller. What is it? Louise inquired with interest. A man's watch charm. It has a picture inside, too. With her fingernail, Penny pried open the lid. Flat against the cover had been fastened the photograph of a boy who might have been 10 or 12 years of age. Where did you get it, Penny? I found it laying on the barn floor, not far from the place where we picked up the black hood last night. Then it must belong to Clem Davis. It may, Penny admitted, sliding into the seat beside her chum. Still, I don't believe the Davises have any children. What will you do with the charm? Turn it over to the sheriff? I suppose I should, after I've shown it to Dad, Penny replied, carefully tying the trinket into the corner of a handkerchief. You know, Lou, since finding this, I wonder if Mrs. Davis may not have told the truth. About what, Penny? She said her husband had been framed. Then you think this watch charm was left in the barn to throw suspicion upon Clem Davis? Penny shook her head. No, this is my theory, Louise. Perhaps someone hid the black hood there and rode Clem's horse to make it appear he was the guilty person. Inadvertently, that same person lost this watch charm. In that case, you would have a clue which might solve the case. Exactly, Penny grinned in triumph. Get ready for a fast ride into town. I'm going to rush this evidence straight to the Star office and get Dad's opinion. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Mr. Blake's Donation. Not wishing to ride to the Star building, Louise asked her chum to drop her off at the Seidel home. Accordingly, Penny left her there and then drove on alone to her father's office. The newsroom hummed with activity as she sauntered through to the private office. "Just a minute, please," her father requested, waving her into a chair. He completed a letter he was dictating, dismissed his secretary, and then was ready to listen. Without preliminary ado, Penny laid the watch charm on the desk, explaining where she had found it. "Dad, this may belong to Clem Davis, but I don't think so," she announced in an excited voice. "It's my theory that the person who planted the black hood in the stable must have lost it." Mr. Parker examined the charm carefully, gazing at the picture of the little boy contained within it. "Very interesting," he commented. "However, I fear you are allowing your imagination to take you for a ride. There isn't much question of Clem Davis' guilt, according to the findings of the sheriff." "Has any new evidence come to light, Dad?" "Yes, Penny. The sheriff's office has gained possession of a document showing beyond question that Clem Davis is a member of a renegade band known as the Black Hoods." "Where did they get their proof?" "Sheriff Davis won't disclose the source of his information. However, our star reporter, Jerry Livingston, is working on the case, and something may develop any hour." "Then you're intending to make it into a big story?" Penny asked thoughtfully. "I am. An underground subversive organization, no matter what its purpose, has no right to an existence. The Star will expose the leaders if possible and break up the group." "Since the Hoods apparently burned the Preston storage barn, their purpose can't be a very noble one," Penny commented. "Nor are their leaders especially clever. The trail led as plain as day to Clem Davis. So straight, in fact, that I couldn't help doubting his guilt." "Penny, I'll keep this watch charm if you don't mind," Mr. Parker said, locking the trinket into a drawer. "I'll put Jerry to work on it, and he may be able to learn the identity of the little boy in the picture." Abruptly changing the subject, the editor inquired regarding his daughter's success in selling camp benefit tags. "I only have one left," Penny replied, presenting it with a flourish. "25 cents, please." "The cause is a worthy one. I'll double the amount." Amiably, Mr. Parker flipped a $half across the desk. "While you're in the giving mood, I might mention that my allowance is due," Penny said with a grin. "Also, you owe me 5 gallons of gasoline. I saw old Seth McGuire this morning, and he agreed with me that the Hubell clock struck 13 last night." Mr. Parker had no opportunity to reply, for just then his secretary re-entered the office to say Mr. Clyde Blake wished to see him. "I suppose that means you want me to evaporate," Penny remarked, gazing questioningly at her father. "No, stay if you like. It's probably nothing of consequence." Penny welcomed an invitation to remain. After her talk with Seth McGuire, she was curious to see the man who had caused the old bellmaker to lose his position at the Hubell Tower. "Blake probably wants to ask me to do him a personal favor," Mr. Parker confided in a low tone. "He's a pest." In a moment, the door opened again to admit the real estate man. He was heavy set, immaculately dressed, and the only defect in his appearance was caused by a right arm which was somewhat shorter than the left. "Good afternoon, Mr. Parker," he said expansively. "And this is your charming daughter?" The editor introduced Penny, who bowed politely and retreated to a chair by the window. Prejudiced against Mr. Blake, she had no desire to talk to him. "What may I do for you?" Mr. Parker asked the caller. "This time it is I who shall bestow the favor," Mr. Blake responded, taking a checkbook from his pocket. "Your paper has been campaigning for a very worthy cause, namely the Orphans' Summer Camp Fund. It wrings my heart that those unfortunate kiddies have been denied the benefit of fresh air and sunshine." "If you wish to make a donation, you should give your money to Mrs. Van Cleve," the editor cut him short. "I much prefer to present my check to you," the caller insisted. "Shall I make it out for $150? "That's a very handsome donation," said Mr. Parker, unable to hide his surprise. "But why give it to me?" Mr. Blake coughed in embarrassment. "I thought you might deem the offering worthy of a brief mention in your paper." "Oh, I see," the editor responded dryly. I don't wish the publicity for myself, you understand, but only for the real estate company which bears my name. I quite understand, Mr. Blake. If we should use your picture, that will be very acceptable, the real estate man responded, smiling with satisfaction. I'll be happy to oblige you by posing. Helping himself to a pen, he wrote out the check and presented it to the editor. "Penny, how would you like to write the story?" inquired her father. "You've been helping Miss Norton with the publicity, I believe." "I'm rather bogged down with work," Penny demurred. "I think Mrs. Weems wants me to clean the attic when I get home." "Never mind the attic. Please conduct Mr. Blake to the photography room and ask one of the boys to take his picture." Penny arose obediently, but as the real estate man left the office ahead of her, she shot her father a black look. She considered a publicity story very trivial indeed, and it particularly displeased her that she must write honeyed words about a man she did not admire. "You have a very nice building here, very nice," Mr. Blake patronizingly remarked as he was escorted toward the photographic department. Noticing a pile of freshly printed newspapers lying on one of the desks, he helped himself to a copy. "I see the sheriff hasn't captured Clem Davis yet," he commented, scanning the front page. "I hope they get him. It's a disgrace to Riverview that such a crime could be perpetrated and the scoundrel go unpunished." "He'll probably be caught," Penny replied absently. "But I wonder if he's the guilty person." "What's that?" Mr. Blake demanded, regarding her with shrewd interest. "You think Davis didn't burn the Preston barn?" "I was only speculating about it." "Reflecting your father's opinion, no doubt." "No, not anyone's but my own." "Your father seems to be making quite a story of it," Mr. Blake resumed. "It will be most unfortunate for the community if he stirs up talk about underground organizations." "Why unfortunate?" Penny asked. "Because it will give the city a bad reputation. I doubt there is anything to this Black Hood talk, but if there should be, any publicity might lead to an investigation by state authorities." "A very good thing, I should think." "You do not understand," Mr. Blake said patiently. "Depredation would increase. Innocent persons would surely suffer. With Riverview known unfavorably throughout the country, we would gain no new residents." Penny did not reply, but opened the door of the photographic room. While Mr. Blake wandered about, inspecting the various equipment, she relayed her father's instructions to Salt Sommers, one of the staff photographers. "Better get a good picture of Blake," she warned him. "He'll be irritated if you don't." "I'll do my best," Salt promised. "But I can't make over a man's face." Mr. Blake proved to be a trying subject. Posed on a stool in front of a screen, he immediately froze into a stiff position. "Be sure to make it only a head and shoulders picture, if you please," he ordered Salt. "Can't you relax?" the photographer asked wearily. "Unloosen your face. Think of all those little orphans you're going to make happy." Mr. Blake responded with a smirk which was painful to behold. Nothing that Salt could say or do caused him to become natural, and at length the photographer took 2 shots which he knew would not be satisfactory. "That'll be all," he announced. Mr. Blake arose, drawing a deep sigh. "Posing is a great ordeal for me," he confessed. "I seldom consent to having my picture taken, but this is a very special occasion." Completely at ease again, the real estate man began to converse with Penny. In sudden inspiration, Salt seized a candid camera from a glass case, and before Mr. Blake was aware of his act, snapped a picture. "There, that's more like it," he said. "I caught you just right, Mr. Blake." The real estate man turned swiftly, his eyes blazing anger. "You dared to take a picture without my permission?" he demanded. "I'll not have it. Destroy the film at once, or I shall protest to Mr. Parker." End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Publicity by Penny. The real estate man's outburst was so unexpected that Penny and Salt could only stare at him in astonishment. "It's a good full-length picture," the photographer argued. "Much better than those other shots I took." "I can't allow it," Blake answered in a calmer tone. He touched his right arm. "You see, I am sensitive about this deformity. Unreasonable of me, perhaps, but I must insist that you destroy the film." "Just as you say," Salt shrugged. "We'll use one of the other pictures." "No, I've changed my mind," Blake said shortly. "I don't care for any picture. Kindly destroy all the films now, in my presence." "Why, Mr. Blake," Penny protested. "I thought you wanted a picture to accompany the story I'm to write." "You may write the article, but I'll have no picture. The films must be destroyed." "Okay," responded Salt. Removing 2 plates from a holder, he exposed them to the light. He started to take the film from the candid camera, but did not complete the operation. Mr. Blake, however, failed to notice. "Thank you, young man," he said, bowing. "I'm sorry to have taken so much of your valuable time, and I appreciate your efforts." Nodding in Penny's direction, Mr. Blake left the studio, closing the door behind him. "Queer duck," commented Salt. "His picture on the front page would be no break for our readers." "I can't understand why Mr. Blake became so provoked," Penny said thoughtfully. "That excuse about his arm seemed a flimsy one." "Let's develop the film and see what it looks like," Salt suggested, starting for the darkroom. "It was just an ordinary shot, though." Penny followed the young photographer into the developing room, watching as he ran the film through the various trays. In exactly 6 minutes the picture was ready, and he held it beneath the ruby light for her to see. "Nothing unusual about it," he repeated. "Blake's right arm looks a bit shorter than the left, but we could have blocked that off." Salt tossed the damp picture into a wastepaper basket, only to have Penny promptly rescue it. "I wish you would save this," she requested. "Put it in an envelope and file it away somewhere in the office." "What's the big idea, Penny?" "Oh, just a hunch, I guess. Someday the paper may want a picture of Blake in a hurry, and this one would serve very nicely." Aware that time was fast slipping away, Penny returned to her father's office to report Mr. Blake's strange action. Mr. Parker, well versed in the peculiarities of newspaper patrons, shrugged indifferently. "Blake always was a queer fellow," he commented, fingering the check which still lay on his desk. "I never trusted him, and I wish I hadn't accepted this money." "How could you have refused, Dad?" "I couldn't very well. All the same, I have a feeling I'll regret it." "Why do you say that?" Penny asked curiously. "No reason, perhaps. Only Blake isn't the man to give something for nothing. He aims to profit by this affair, or I'm no judge of human nature." "He craves publicity, that's for certain." "Yes, but there's more to it than that," Mr. Parker declared. "Ah, well," he dismissed the subject. "I'll turn the check over to the camp committee and let someone else do the worrying." "I'll tell you why I dislike Mr. Blake," Penny said with feeling. "He caused Seth McGuire to lose his job at the Hubell Tower." "That's so?" the editor asked in surprise. "I hadn't heard about it." "Blake gave the position to a special friend of his. Can't you do something about it, Dad?" "I don't know any of the basic facts, Penny. Why should I interfere in a matter that's none of my affair?" "At least let's not give Mr. Blake a big build-up because of his donation." "The story must be written," Mr. Parker said with finality. "I always keep a bargain, even a bad one." "Then you might write the story," Penny proposed mischievously. "I can't spell such a big word as hypocrite." "Never mind," Mr. Parker reproved. "Just get busy and see that you handle the article in a way favorable to Blake." With a deep sigh, Penny took herself to the adjoining newsroom. Selecting a typewriter, she pecked listlessly at the keys. Presently, Jerry Livingston, one of the reporters, fired a paper ball at her. "Your story must be a masterpiece," he teased. "It's taken you long enough to write it." Penny jerked the sheet of copy from the typewriter roller. "It's not fair," she complained. I have to dish out soft soap while you handle all the interesting stories. There should be a law against it." "Learn to take the bitter along with the whipped cream," chuckled Jerry. "I've also just been handed an assignment that's not to my liking." "Covering the Preston fire, I suppose?" "Nothing that spectacular. DeWitt's sending me out to the Riverview Orphans' Home to dig up human interest material in connection with the Camp Fund campaign. Hey, want to ride along as ballast?" "Well, I don't know," Penny debated. "I've had almost enough of publicity stories for one day." "Ah, come on," Jerry coaxed, taking her by the arm. "You can talk to the orphans and maybe turn up a lot of interesting facts." "For you to write," she added ruefully. "Just a Sister Friday. That's my fate in this office." Actually, Penny welcomed an opportunity to accompany Jerry, for she liked him much better than any young man of her acquaintance. Spearing the story she had just written on the copy desk spindle, she followed the reporter to the parking lot. Jerry helped her into one of the press cars and they expertly drove through the heavy downtown traffic. "What's the latest on the Preston case?" Penny inquired, clutching her hat to keep it from blowing out the window. "No latest," Jerry answered briefly. "The Prestons won't talk, Mrs. Davis won't talk, the sheriff won't talk. So far it totals up to one little story about a fire." "Dad said the sheriff had learned Clem Davis was a member of a secret organization, probably known as the Black Hoods." "Sheriff Daniels claims he has documentary proof," Jerry admitted. "He won't produce it though, and I have a sneaking suspicion that he may be bluffing." "Then you think he wants to convict Clem Davis whether or not he's guilty?" "He wants to end the case just as quickly as he can, Penny. The November elections aren't far away. If this night writer story gets a start, the dear public might turn on him, demanding action or his job." "Do you think there actually is such an organization as the Black Hoods, Jerry?" "I do," he returned soberly. "After talking with the Prestons and Mrs. Davis, I'm convinced they could tell quite a bit about it if they were willing to furnish evidence." It pleased Penny that Jerry's opinion so nearly coincided with her own. Eagerly, she told him of her own talk with Mrs. Davis, mentioning that someone had been hiding in the cornfield near the cabin. "What time was that?" Jerry asked, stopping the car at a traffic light. "Oh, shortly after 12 o'clock." "Then it couldn't have been Sheriff Daniels or his deputies," the reporter declared. "I was at the county office talking to them about that same time." "It might have been Clem Davis," Penny suggested. "I'm sure his wife knows where he's hiding." As the car sped over the country road, she kept the discussion alive by mentioning the watch charm which she had picked up at the Davis stable. Jerry had not seen the picture of the little boy, but promised to inspect it just as soon as he returned to the Star offices. "Clem Davis has no children," he assured Penny, "so it's unlikely the charm ever belonged to him. You may have found an important clue." "I only wish Dad would officially assign me to the story," she grumbled. "He never will, though." Presently the car approached the Riverview Orphans' Home, a large brick building set back some distance from the road. Children in drab blue uniforms could be seen playing in the front yard, supervised by a woman official. "Poor kids," Jerry said with honest feeling. "You can't help feeling sorry for them. They deserve the best summer camp this town can provide." "The project is certain to be possible now," Penny replied. "Mr. Blake's check put the campaign over the top." Jerry gave the steering wheel an expert flip, turning the car into the private road. "Don't tell me that old bird actually parted with any money." "Oh, he did, Jerry. He donated a check for $150. "And no strings attached?" "Well, he hinted that he wanted a nice write-up about himself. I was torturing myself with the story when you interrupted." "It's mighty queer," the reporter muttered. "Leopards don't change their spots. Blake must expect something more tangible than publicity out of this deal." His mind centering on what Penny had just told him, Jerry gave no thought to his driving. Handling the steering wheel skillfully but automatically, he whirled the car into the play area of the institution, drawing up with a loud screeching of brakes. Uncertain that the reporter could stop, the children scattered in all directions. One little girl remained squarely in front of the car. Covering her face with her hands, she began to scream. "Gosh all fish hooks!" Jerry exclaimed. "I didn't mean to frighten the kid." Jumping from the coupe, he and Penny ran to the child. "You're all right," Jerry said, stooping beside the little girl. "The car didn't come within a mile of you. I'm mighty sorry." Nothing that either he nor Penny could say seemed to quiet the child. Her screams did not subside until a matron appeared and took her by the hand. "Come, Adele," she said gently. "We'll go into the house." "I'm as sorry as I can be," Jerry apologized, doffing his hat. "I didn't intend to drive into the yard so fast. It's all my fault." The attendant smiled to set him at ease. "Don't mind," she said quietly. "Adele is very easily upset. I'll explain to you later." End of chapter 8.